Hey guys, hoping all is well with everyone. So in this video we are going to be starting the final book of the Wayside School series Read-Alouds, and this is going to be book number 3, Wayside School Gets a Little Stranger. So if you guys have been able to watch the other read-alouds of this book series, I hope you guys have enjoyed them. They're very silly, very wacky, and kind of goofy, and they just kind of have all these twists and turns that you never really expect. But I hope you guys enjoy the read today. We'll be starting with chapter 1. And as always, these book series tend to have pictures and illustrations, especially on the first page of the chapters. So I'll be showing you guys as we go forward. Chapter 1, Explanation. For 243 days, a lonely sign hung on the front of the old school building. Wayside School closed for repairs. On some days a child would come, look at the sign, then sadly walk away. Or else a child would come, look at the sign, stand on her head, then sadly walk away. Louis watched them come and go, but he never said "hi" to them. He hid when they came. It was his job to repair the school. Louis used to be the yard teacher at Wayside School. He passed out the balls and played with the kids at recess and lunch. When the school closed, the children were sent to other schools. Horrible schools. No two kids were sent to the same school. Louis was afraid he'd cry if he talked to them. But he worked hard. For 242 days, he pushed and pulled, shoveled and mopped. He never left the building. At night, he slept on the couch in the teacher's lounge on the 12th floor. Some days, it seemed hopeless. The worst part was the smell. He often had to run and stick his head out a window to get a breath of fresh air. But whenever he felt like quitting, he thought about those poor kids stuck in those horrible schools, and he just worked harder. And at last, 243 days later, the school was ready to open. Well, almost ready. There was one little problem. Suddenly, from somewhere inside the building, or maybe just inside his head, Louis heard a loud moo. He put his hands over his ears and said, "I don't hear it, I don't hear it, I don't hear it," until the mooing stopped. He had scrubbed and polished every inch of Wayside School. There were no cows anywhere. He was sure of it. Still, every once in a while, he heard something go moo, or at least he thought he did. He took the sign off the door. But before you enter, you should know something about Wayside School. Wayside School is a 30-story building with one room on each story. Except there is no 19th story. Mrs. Jules teaches the class on the 30th story. Miss Zars teaches the class on the 19th story. There is no Miss Zars. Understand? Good. Explain it to me. "Louis!" someone shouted. He turned to see a red and blue overcoat running toward him. "Hi, Sherry," he said. He couldn't see her face, but he knew she had to be somewhere inside the coat. Sherry jumped into his arms. "I bet you're glad to be back," said Louis. "You bet," said Sherry. "Now I can finally get some sleep." All around the playground, other old friends were getting back together. "Hi, old pal," said John. "Hey, good buddy," said Joe. "Bebe!" yelled Calvin from one side of the playground. "Calvin!" shouted Bebe from the other. They ran and smashed into each other. "Hi, Eric. Good to see you," said Eric. "Hey, good to see you too," said Eric. "Oh, look, there's Eric." "Hi, Eric." "Hi, Eric." "Hi, Eric." "Hi, Eric." Even Kathy said hello to everybody. "Hey, big ears," she said to Myron as she slapped him on the back. "What's happening, Smelly?" she asked Damien. "You didn't take a bath for 243 days, did you?" "Hi, Allison. Did you get uglier while you were away, or were you always this ugly and I just forgot?" "That's a nice sweater, Kathy," said Allison, who always tried to say something nice. Kathy moved on to Terrence. "I'm sure glad to see you, Terrence," she said. "You are?" asked Terrence. "Yes," said Kathy. "I thought you'd be in jail by now." Todd came running across the playground. "Hi, Todd!" shouted Sherry, right in Lewis's ear. Todd kept running. "Hey, Todd!" called Jason. "Good to see you." "Hi, Todd!" called Myron and DJ. But Todd didn't answer. He just kept running until he reached the school building. Then he kissed Wayside School. Out of all the schools, Todd had been sent to the very worst one. It was awful. The first thing he had to do every morning was... Wait a second. I don't have to tell you. You already know. Todd was sent to your school. Chapter 2. A Message from the Principal. Damien hurried up the stairs. He couldn't wait to see Mrs. Jules, his favorite teacher in the whole world. But the 30th floor was a lot higher up than he remembered, even if there was no 19th. But the time he got up there, his legs hurt, his side ached, and he had a blister on the back of his ankle where it rubbed against his sneaker. He stumbled into the room and collapsed on the floor. "Hi, Mrs. Jules," he gasped. "Hi, Damien. Welcome back," said Mrs. Jules. Damien looked up at her. Something seemed different about her, but he wasn't sure what it was. "Oh, Damien, would you do me a favor?" she asked. "Sure," said Damien. "I left my pencil in my office," said Mrs. Jules. "Would you mind going down and getting it for me?" "No problem," said Damien. "It's yellow," said Mrs. Jules. "It has a point at one end and a red eraser at the other." Damien got to his feet and headed down the stairs. One by one the other children staggered into the classroom, huffing and puffing. They were all out of shape. Still, they were very excited to be back in Mrs. Jules' class. Shouts of joy could be heard from every corner of the room. Mrs. Jules held up 2 fingers. All the children became quiet. Joy stopped shouting. Mrs. Jules told the children to sit at their old desks. "So, did everyone learn anything at your other schools?" she asked. Mac raised his hand. "Ooh, ooh," he grunted. "Yes, Mac," said Mrs. Jules. "Civilization," declared Mac. "What about civilization?" asked Mrs. Jules. "We learned it," said Mac. "That's very impressive," said Mrs. Jules. "Would you like to tell the class something about civilization?" Mac thought a moment. "I don't remember," he said, "but I know we learned it." "That's good, Mac," said Mrs. Jules. "Anyone else learn anything?" Rondi raised her hand. "Evaporation," she said. "Good," said Mrs. Jules. "What is evaporation?" "I don't know," said Rondi. Dana raised her hand. "I learned about exaggeration," she said. "It was all my teacher ever talked about. We had like 10,000 tests on it, and the teacher would kill you if you didn't spell it right." "That's very good, Dana," said Mrs. Jules. "You learned your lesson well." "I did?" asked Dana. Mrs. Jules shrugged. "Well, I guess we'll continue where we left off." Just then, Mr. Kidswatter's voice came over the PA system. "Good morning, boys and girls." Mr. Kidswatter was the principal. He paused a moment because he thought every kid in the school was saying, "Good morning, Mr. Kidswatter," back to him. Nobody said it. Sherry buried her head in her huge coat, closed her eyes, and went to sleep. "Welcome back to Wayside School," said Mr. Kidswatter. "I know I'm sure glad to be back. It was wonderful to see all of your bright and chipper faces this morning. I missed every single one of you. And welcome back to Miss Mush, too. Today's lunch menu will be baked liver in purple sauce. Miss Mush actually cooked this before the school was closed, but she assures me it's still as tasty as ever." "I'm sure it is," said Myron. "A safety reminder. Now it has been a while since you had to rush up and down the stairs, and I want to make sure there are no accidents. So remember this simple rule. When you go up the stairs, stay to your right. When you go down the stairs, stay to your left. That way, there should be no problems. Okay, let's have a good day. And remember, I am your friend, and you're my friends. And if you ever need a friend, you can always come to me." "Isn't that nice?" said Mrs. Jules. "What a bunch of baloney! There I was, lying on a beach in Jamaica, when I suddenly get a fax that a dumb school was back open. Well, those kids better not bother me. My friends, that's a joke. Like I would really want to be friends with those little snot-nosed... What? Don't tell me to shut up. You shut up. What's on? You mean they're hearing what I'm saying right this very second? Well, how do you turn it off? What button? I don't see a red button. There is no red button. Oh, here it... Chapter 3. Poetry. Mrs. Jules told everyone to pick a color and write a poem about it. "Huh?" said Joy. "For example," said Mrs. Jules, "if brown was your favorite color, you might write, 'At the circus I saw a clown. On his face was a great big frown. His sad eyes were big and brown.'" "Could you repeat that just a little bit slower?" asked Joy. Mrs. Jules repeated it for her. "Ooh, I'm going to do purple," said Rondi. Rondi loved anything purple. "You can't do purple," said Allison. "I'm doing it." "So?" said Rondi. "Mrs. Jules didn't say two people couldn't do the same color." "But purple is my favorite color in the world," said Allison. Rondi and Allison were best friends, but Allison always got her way. Rondi switched to blue. Joe raised his hand. "I don't know what rhymes with red," he said. Mrs. Jules gave him a few suggestions. Bed, lead, wed. Think of words that end in ed. "Oh, I get it," said Joe. He set to work. Rondi tried to think of words that rhymed with blue. She raised her hand. "Mrs. Jules," she said, "I chose blue. Can I rhyme that with zoo?" "Yes, that would be a good rhyme," agreed Mrs. Jules. "How about glue?" asked Rondi. "Yes, that rhymes too," said Mrs. Jules. "Oh, I know," said Rondi. "How about stew?" "Just pick one and get started," said Mrs. Jules. Rondi smiled. "This is fun," she told Allison. "There are a lot of words that rhyme with blue." Allison grunted. Nothing rhymed with purple in her mind. Allison had gone through every letter of the alphabet. Arple, burple, curple, durple, all the way to zerple. But after making a big stink over it with Rondi, she couldn't switch colors now. Rondi was just about to start her poem when she got an even better idea. "Love, that's true. Poets are always writing about love, that's true, aren't they, Mrs. Jules?" "Sometimes," said Mrs. Jules. Rondi smiled, except she really didn't know much about true love. "Morning dew," she said. "Poets write about morning dew, too, don't they, Mrs. Jules?" "I believe so," said Mrs. Jules. Dana walked to Mrs. Jules' desk. "I can't think of anything that rhymes with pink," she complained. "I'm sure you'll think of something," said Mrs. Jules, and she winked at her. "I can't think," said Dana. "My mind's on the blink. I'm no good at poetry. I stink." "Just keep trying," said Mrs. Jules. Dana returned to her seat. She started to put her name on her paper, but her pen wouldn't write. "Great," she complained. "Now my pen's out of ink." "Hey, Dana," whispered John. "Do you want to borrow my pen?" "Sure," said Dana. "Too bad, I'm using it," said John. Then he and Joe cracked up. Meanwhile, Allison was going through all the alphabet for the 10th time. "Murple, nurple, warple, quarple," she thought. "My left shoe!" exclaimed Rondi. "You better choose something, Rondi, and get started," advised Mrs. Jules. "I got it," said Rondi. "A bird that flew." At the end of the day, the children turned in their poems. Yellow by Kathy. "I don't feel too well," Oh, I don't know who to tell. Oh, I'm sick and I smell. Oh, my barf is yellow. Green by Stefan. The swimming pool has lots of chlorine. It turned my hair green. Brown by Joy. At the circus I saw a clown. On his face was a great big frown. His eyes were big and brown. Red by Joe. The fire truck is red. It hurried. The siren wailed. The house burned. The fireman saved the baby who screamed. Pink by Dana. My favorite color is pink. John is a rat fink. Purple by Allison. The baby won't stop crying. His face is turning purple. Will anything make him feel better? I bet a burple. Blue by Rondi. That was as far as she got. Chapter 4. Dr. Pickle. Actually, his name was Dr. Pickle, with the accent on the second syllable. But that wasn't why everyone called him Dr. Pickle. Dr. Pick-ell was a psychiatrist. He had thick eyebrows and wore tiny glasses. He had a small beard on the tip of his pointed chin. A psychiatrist is a doctor who doesn't cure people with sick bodies. He cures people with sick minds. Although Dr. Pickle had a pretty sick mind himself. One day, a woman came into his office. She smoked too much, and she wanted him to help her quit. Here's the picture. I know that smoking is no good for me, she said as she puffed on a cigarette. It's bad for my heart. It fills my lungs with gunk, and my husband won't kiss me because my breath stinks. But I can't quit. She finished her cigarette, smushed it out in an ashtray, then immediately lit another one. Have a seat, said Dr. Pickle. She sat down on the couch. Look into my eyes, said Dr. Pickle. The woman stared into his deep, penetrating eyes. Dr. Pickle held up a gold chain. At the end of the chain was a green stone that was almost transparent, but not quite. It looked like a pickle, hence his name. Watch the pickle, he said, as he gently moved the chain. The pickle went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The woman's eyes went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Put down your cigarette, Dr. Pickle said in a strong but gentle voice. The woman set her cigarette in the ashtray as she continued to stare at the pickle. You are getting sleepy, said Dr. Pickle. Your eyelids are getting heavy. The woman blinked her eyes. When I count to 3, said Dr. Pickle, you will fall into a deep, deep sleep. 1, 2, 3. The woman's eyes closed. Dr. Pickle put down the pickle. Can you hear me? He asked. Yes, said the woman in a low voice from deep inside her. You will do what I say, said Dr. Pickle. I will do what you say, the woman repeated. I am going to count to 5, said Dr. Pickle, and then you will wake up, and as usual, you will want to smoke a cigarette. I will want to smoke a cigarette, the woman repeated. But when you put the cigarette in your mouth, said Dr. Pickle, it will feel just like a worm, a wiggly, slimy worm. A yucky, icky worm, repeated the woman. Good, said Dr. Pickle. Now just one more thing. He rubbed his beard and smiled. Whenever your husband says the word potato, you will slap him across the face. When Fred says potato, I will slap his face. Good, said Dr. Pickle. He counted to 5. The woman woke up. So do you think you can help me? She asked in her normal voice as she reached for her cigarette. Dr. Pickle shrugged. She put her cigarette in her mouth, then screamed as she pulled it out. She looked at the cigarette, puzzled. "Hmm?" she said. She placed it back in her mouth and spit it onto the floor. "I'm sorry," she said, a little confused. She picked up the cigarette and put it in the ashtray. "That's all right," said Dr. Pickle. She took out a new cigarette from her pack, but as soon as she put that into her mouth, she spit it out too. "I'm sorry," she said. I don't know what's come over me." She walked out of his office, shaking her head. She dropped her pack of cigarettes in the trash. She never smoked again. It was interesting to think about the word potato. Whenever Fred said it, she slapped him. And he'd ask her why she slapped him, but she never remembered slapping him. So they'd get in a big fight, each calling the other crazy. Then they'd kiss and make up, which was nice because her breath didn't stink. They never figured out they never figured out it had anything to do with saying potato. How could they? But deep down, they both have just realized it somehow, because while they used to eat lots of potatoes, they gradually ate fewer and fewer, until they finally stopped eating them altogether. Dr. Pickle was a good doctor, but he kept playing those kinds of jokes on people. There was a woman who quacked like a duck whenever she saw a freight train with more than 20 cars. There was a man who took off his shoe anytime someone said parking meter. Eventually, Dr. Pickle was caught, and he was no longer allowed to practice psychiatry, so he had to find another job. He became a counselor at an elementary school. And I'll stop the video there, ending chapter 4. But I hope you guys enjoyed the read aloud today, and again, I hope you guys are enjoying the read aloud series of Wayside School. But I hope to see you guys next time in our continuation of Wayside School. It gets a little stranger, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, please take good care of yourselves and be safe. Bye.